Welcome to Rising. Excited to bring you the news today, yet again, with Niall at my side. Nice to see you, my friend.
Always a pleasure to be here, Robby. A lot of news to get to yet again, even as Thanksgiving looms just around the corner.
The giant turkey looming behind us.
The shadow of the giant turkey. Before we get to the giant turkey, Robby, what is on your radar?
Well, have no fear. Despite recently making a pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to beg the president-elect for forgiveness after years of anti-Trump commentary, MSNBC's Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski are still supplying their increasingly shrinking audience with the same tired and worn-out mainstream liberal diatribes. This was evident on the show the other day as Scarborough ceaselessly praised his friend, frequent guest, Axios CEO Jim VandeHei, who recently won a journalism award from the National Press Club. Journalists love to shower each other with awards, with affirmation and applause. In fact, Scarborough played a clip of VandeHei's award acceptance speech and then exhorted everyone else on screen to please clap. Let's watch that clip of the speech and the reaction from MSNBC.
Everything we do is under fire. Elon Musk sits on Twitter every day, or X today, saying like, we are the media, you are the media. My message to Elon Musk is bullshit. You're not the media. You having a blue check mark, a Twitter handle, and 300 words of cleverness doesn't make you a reporter any more than me looking at your head and seeing that you have a brain and telling you have an awesome set of tools makes me a damn neurosurgeon, right? Like what we do, what journalists do, what you did in Mississippi, what Al Jazeera does in the Middle East. You don't proclaim yourself to be a reporter. Like, that's nonsense. Like, being a reporter's hard, really hard. You have to care. You have to do the hard work. You have to get up every single day and say, I want to get to the closest approximation of the truth without any fear, without any favoritism. You don't do that by popping off on Twitter. You don't do that by having an opinion. You do it by doing the hard work.
Yeah, come on, slow clap, everybody. Whoa. First of all, I've got to say, extraordinary content. It needed to be said.
So I wanted to show the reaction there from Joe and Mika and company because it's such a telling example of how the mainstream media has gone wrong. Liberal journalistic institutions are not failing because Elon Musk is mean to them. They're failing because they have lost the trust of the American people. They got important stories wrong during COVID, Hunter Biden's laptop, Russiagate, and so on. And despite these failures, they have become smug and self-congratulatory. They look down on people who disagree with them. More importantly, they dismiss the contributions of individuals who are succeeding in a changing media landscape because they're breaking the rules that were prescribed by the elite media figures. And so this is what they are reduced to, giving each other awards and clapping like seals. Now, I want to focus more closely on what VandeHei actually said during his acceptance speech because, look, he's extremely wrong, and I want to explain exactly why he's wrong, so let's watch that again.
Elon Musk sits on Twitter every day, or X today, saying like, we are the media, you are the media. My message to Elon Musk is bullshit. You're not the media. You having a blue check mark, a Twitter handle, and 300 words of cleverness doesn't make you a reporter any more than me looking at your head and seeing that you have a brain and telling you have an awesome set of tools makes me a damn neurosurgeon.
First of all, the idea that VandeHei, the CEO and co-founder of Axios, would make fun of people for tweeting 300 words of cleverness is insane. Axios' mantra is smart brevity. Their very business model is writing extremely short, tweetable articles. VandeHei actually wrote a book about this approach. It's called Smart Brevity, The Power of Saying More with Less. In his Axios write-up of the book, he encourages writers to keep it short and keep in mind that you'll be lucky to have readers' attention spans for more than 200 words. I actually think there's a lot of merit to that. It's one reason I've pivoted substantially to video over the years. I found it easier to keep people engaged for longer in this format, the format you're consuming right now, than it is with written articles. Keeping your written commentary short enough for social media is a fine strategy, so why is VandeHei making fun of people who write mostly on Twitter X? Well, we actually know why. He's not talking about professional journalists who are active on X or social media elsewhere. He's talking about people he derides as amateurs, independent commentators, influencers, content creators who have thrived in this new alternative ecosystem unleashed by the major online platforms. People who are doing the work of informing the public without the mainstream media's permission or approval. Van de Heij's comparison of journalists to neurosurgeons is very telling. He evidently thinks engaging in reporting is a lot like performing brain surgery, a task that should be reserved for the experts, the credentialed, those who have spent countless years and hundreds of thousands of dollars learning, honing, and perfecting their craft at elite educational institutions. He's wrong. Neurosurgery is like that. Journalism is not like that at all. Take it from me, someone who worked primarily as a news and commentary reporter for 10 years before switching mostly to the role of TV host. Reporting is, in fact, something anyone can do. It does not take years of exhaustive and expensive training. They're lying to you if they say it does. All it takes is a transcription device or a camera, maybe access to a publishing platform such as social media, things that are now available on every smartphone there is. I can see why that might be frustrating to the credentialed elites who spend all that time and money, their parents' money in many cases, but it is, in fact, the truth. And I get really annoyed when professional journalists do this kind of thing. Treat it like it's a priesthood that you have to belong to in able to participate in it. Is certainly the case that amateur people just spouting off or popping off on Twitter are certainly capable of getting things wrong, but so are the mainstream media institutions. And to denigrate those people, particularly, he was kind of vaguely referencing conflict reporting or international reporting, which is the one area of professional journalism that is genuinely dangerous. And the people who do that deserve awards and accolades and under authoritarian regimes, all that kind of thing. But sometimes we do get good on-the-ground reporting from amateurs in those cases as well. We're reliant on them. What did you make of his comments?
So I'm going to defend Jim Van de Heij and disagree with your overall take, though I take some of the points within it. First of all, I think anytime the media is discussed, people watching always have a suspicion that there's some other agenda at play. So let me first say, I have never, to my recollection, had a conversation with Jim Van de Heij. Politico and Axios are competitors to some extent of The Hill. I read them. He has founded, or he was involved in the founding of Politico, and obviously in Axios. He has made those work. Fair play to him in that respect. I've no axe to grind with him. I also have no personal relationship that would make me a particular defender of his. Here's the point. First of all, on screen we have Axios CEO melts down. Now, did he really melt down? He actually made an impassioned defense of professional journalism. The other point I have really, which is a bigger point, Robby, is some of the words he used weren't perfect. He derided opinion, and he knows as well as anyone that there's a long history of advocacy journalism or opinion writing that is perfectly credible. The problem I have, I think, or where I would disagree with you, is sometimes I think independent journalism and that label is raised up as if it is sort of whiter than the driven snow, and all the fault or agenda or bias is on establishment media side. And sadly, I don't think that's true at all. I at one point was very excited about this growth in independent media. And when I started looking at more independent sources of left and right, I found they catered to the predisposition of their audience just as much. There was just as much implicit bias. There was just as much telling the audience what they wanted to hear. And so the propensity to revere independent media as if they are the truth tellers and it's the legacy media that are the corrupt, broken down people, I just don't think is accurate.
Well, I agree with you to an extent. I think some of the criticisms that people in independent media or fans of independent media make of legacy media, and they say that an independent media is better because it doesn't have these problems, are not exactly right when they get into, and I hear this from a lot of left-leaning people, but probably some right-wing people make this as well, the whole you're bought by your advertisers or that kind of thing if you're in big corporate media like we technically are.
Yeah.
For a big corporation. And the truth is, that actually has very little influence or no influence over the things we say and do. What has way more influence over us is, as you said, knowing what viewers, readers, subscribers expect and what they want to hear discussed. And so we are more likely to discuss that. And that is an issue across the media. That's in independent media as well. That's in legacy media. That's in, if you're a nonprofit, you have donors. If you're on Patreon, you have subscribers. You have, every format for media is people giving you money because they like what you're doing, and that will fundamentally always be some kind of tension. But what I do like about at least many independent content creators are, I think, a little bit more transparent that is their business model and that is what they're doing and that they have perspectives and biases. Even when I was doing news reporting, I'm an opinion-based journalist for a magazine, and I have a perspective and an ideology that I try to be very open about, but you should always take what I say with a grain of salt based on that. And I think that's there's always a lot of reporting in legacy media, and this commentary kind of fell in that line where there's so much disparaging of social media from people coming out of a business model that was disrupted by social media that sounds to me like sour grapes.
I do.
It sounds to me like people whining about that.
I do take that as a fair point, and I do think that it is simply not true to suggest that people on X or people on any other form of social media are inherently not journalists. I mean, as you pointed out in your radar, for a start, lots of professional journalists are on those platforms, but the thing, it's a bit like when people talk about music, there's an old saying in music that there aren't really genres, there's good music and bad music, right? With journalism, there's good journalism and bad journalism, and that's not dependent upon the platform that it is on or the format that it is in, really. To your point about resources, I do think that if you have the institutional weight of the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal behind you, it is easier to go against what you might think to be the general consensus of your readership than if you are a sole proprietor, for want of a better word, where you are dependent upon those subscriptions wholly and solely, and sometimes I think anything that cuts against your reader's inclination goes badly for those people.
That's why we've discovered the magic formula, Niall.
Exactly.
Where some of the people listening, watching, etc., like what I have to say. Some of them like what you have to say, and vice versa. And we have a debate and argument about it, and we let people decide for themselves. So
exactly.
we present a wide range of perspectives while still giving people, what they're tuning in for.
So like one big happy family around here, Robby.
We're perfect, that's what I'm saying. All right, lots more to come on Rising today. We've got some great interviews. Melik Abdul will be here to discuss the Trump cabinet picks, and a bit later, Brianna Wu will be talking about this latest transgender bill that Nancy Mace is pushing on Capitol Hill. Stay tuned. And now it ends. Special Counsel Jack Smith has dismissed the election interference case and classified documents cases against President-elect Donald Trump. About the January 6th case, Smith's team wrote, after careful consideration, the department has determined that the Office of Legal Counsel's prior opinions concerning the Constitution's prohibition on federal indictment and prosecution of a sitting president apply to this situation, and as a result, this prosecution must be dismissed before the defendant is inaugurated.
Trump responded on Truth Social, writing, quote, "It was a political hijacking and a low point in the history of our country that such a thing could have happened, and yet I persevered against all odds and won Make America Great Again." The motion for the election interference case, which sought to hold Trump accountable for his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, was dismissed by Judge Tanya Chutkan, quote, "without prejudice." That phrase means the charges could, at least theoretically, be refiled after Trump leaves office. Smith's request for a dismissal on those terms in the Florida Documents case, that's where Trump is facing charges for violating the Espionage Act and for obstruction of justice, must also be approved by a judge.
Reaction is pouring in on X. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene posted, "Major victory for President Trump and justice. These fake and illegal charges were used to persecute President Trump for being the biggest threat to the Democrat regime. Political persecution should never happen in America." And Trump legal spokesperson Alina Habba wrote, "Will Jack Smith reimburse taxpayers for the millions wasted on this bogus witch hunt he just dropped? Asking for America." Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton weighed in. The Jack Smith case will be remembered as a dark chapter of weaponization. They should have never been brought. Our elections are decided by voters, not by fanatical, deranged liberal lawyers like Jack Smith.
Democrats, on the other hand, are predictably unhappy. California Senator-elect Adam Schiff called Smith's dismissal a serious mistake, and New York Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman cast the decision as a shame for justice in this country. Goldman added that it establishes that Donald Trump is above the law.
I mean, I just don't see how you could not dismiss the charges, given the situation the Supreme Court left the legal matter with, clarifying that as president, and that Donald Trump would have the ability to just end it anyway. So it's not really isn't really a choice to bring it to an end at this point. The voters decided they wanted Donald Trump to be president again, and they knew very well that these things were not going to continue if Donald Trump won re-election. And so I think it is, the will of the people ultimately.
So I think it is not surprising that Jack Smith has done what Jack Smith did. I think, though, that focusing only on that loses the bigger picture, which is that Donald Trump has got away with this stuff. And that's where I think there's a major problem for many, many, many people. And look, I know this gets sucked into the debate about politicization and all of that. All I would say to people is read the indictments. Like, read the indictments about January the 6th. Read the indictments about Mar-a-Lago. The Mar-a-Lago case, if the behavior is as alleged in the indictment, is absolutely textbook obstruction of justice. A lawful subpoena had been issued, all sorts of chicanery behind the scenes where boxes are being removed from one place and a fewer number of boxes are being returned. There are attempts to remove or delete surveillance camera footage and all the rest of it. On January the 6th, Smith did make the point, which might appeal to a free speech advocate like yourself, Robby, that it was not about Trump making the argument that the election had been fraudulent or whatever, even if he knew that claim was false. It was about the taking of action to intimidate state officials, to seek to have the Department of Justice launch sham investigations into specious allegations of election fraud, and so on and so forth. While Trump all the while had been told by his own vice president, by his own campaign team, by advisors around him, that the election was not fraudulent. He's got away with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a significant area of disagreement because I also read the indictment, and I think that Trump's conduct relating to the election matters was appalling. His involvement in what happened in January 6th is disqualifying, and that impeachment was the correct remedy for what occurred. However, he was acquitted. It was the Senate's job to vote to remove him from office. Yep. They declined. And to me, that's like, well, that was the appropriate thing to handle. And then they came up with this criminal idea. I have read the indictment. Look, I think, for instance, the Georgia case is making a better argument of tying it to specific actions taken by underlings of his, and it being because of the way the Georgia statute is structured to be a kind of group criminal conspiracy. He's gonna, and also he can't dismiss those state charges, so that is going to be a stronger case. Now they've screwed it up by having a prosecutor who hired her boyfriend to do it and all that fun stuff. But the problem for me with the Jack Smith, and you say it's about actions, but I read the indictment, and there are several places where it says, at this time he wrote on X. At this time he did. There's attempt to use tracking data to find out, was he on his phone during the course? How soon did he know that there was a riot going on? That kind of thing that does, to me, was going to be an interesting philosophical debate over when words cross the line into actions. Obviously, if you plan to rob a bank and you tell people about it, well, that's still part of criminal activity. It's not, we don't say, oh, it's speech, so it's protected. That said, I would give him a lot of leeway to say things and ask for things and make assertions that, while wrong, are still part of his own free speech. You say intimidating state officials. Again, they could make that case, and maybe they would have convinced a jury that it was intimidation. But even something, again, I'm not defending it or saying that it's correct, but from a legal matter, to criminalize, to prosecute and potentially jail someone for saying, like, I think I won 10,000 more votes. Can't you find the 10,000 more votes that I won by? Is that intimidation, or is that his wrong-headed opinion?
I theoretically... If you don't like it,
you didn't have to vote for him, or they could have removed him from office. They didn't do either of those things.
But he was president of the United States at the time. It's not me calling up the Georgia Secretary of State and saying, hey, could you find Trump 11th? It's the sitting president of the United States. There is inherently such power wielded by the occupant of that office that it is on its face intimidatory, in my view.
Well, I mean, if you take that view, isn't everything the president says a kind of intimidation? Or when Joe Biden, and I've criticized him for this, I don't think he should be prosecuted criminally for it. When Joe Biden says, Facebook is killing people because it didn't take down enough misinformation, is that pressuring the company to do more? I mean, I would argue that it is. I don't know that it's criminal. I mean, everything the president does is an expression of potential legislation or executive action or something.
Yeah.
Again, I think what Trump said was wrong and bad, and he shouldn't have done it. And there was the mechanism to hold him accountable for it was impeachment, and that just didn't work. And then the other mechanism was not voting to reelect him. The American people did so. I really worry about, I would give a lot of latitude to people, even political officials, to say things that are wrong.
So I think, we basically disagree on a president asking for things in that respect. And I think that there are plainly actions involved in what Trump did in and around January the 6th and in the lead up to it, having lost the election and then seeking to overturn that election result. I would also say that one of the reasons I am often as focused or more focused on the Mar-a-Lago case is that even though it is not of quite the monumental historic importance of January the 6th, the actions there are very
in that
clear.
Case, there's no
defense, right? The only
the defense is it's trivial. Is the defense.
or the defense is he didn't do what the indictment says he did. But if he did do those things, it is not just whether it is trivial or not to have the information in boxes. It is the obvious attempt, if the conduct set forth in the indictment is true, to obstruct justice by avoiding a lawful subpoena.
Yeah, I mean, that one just doesn't seems, I say it's trivial because it's not trivial actually, but boxes of documents were retained by Joe Biden and Mike Pence and probably every other political figure accidentally.
Yes, but Joe Biden wasn't subpoenaed to produce them.
They gave them back
right.
when asked, and Donald Trump didn't, and so this whole thing happened. And he could have very easily given them back, but he took the view that he didn't have to give them back, that he had declassified them, and he was entitled to keep them, and that was important because the generals were going to try to say that he was advocating for war with North Korea, and he wanted to keep those documents so that said that no, here's where actually they were doing that, or they had a plan to attack North Korea. That wasn't on me, which actually does sound like a potentially politically of worth a point to be able to make. And also, I take so much umbrage at the knee-jerk classification of every single thing as classified or secret or being withheld. That said, he should have just given it back like the other political figures, but I'm not gonna. I don't wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat that, oh my God, that box of documents was in the Mar-a-Lago bathroom. Oh no, not that.
But the point isn't really the classification, Robbie. I will stretch here to try to be fair to Trump. The question in Trump's several cases to me is, would an individual citizen be prosecuted for the same conduct? And I think that Trump could offer a defense on things like the New York case in that respect. But if you or I were subpoenaed to produce documents, whether we thought the underlying reason for producing those was right or not, and we conspired with people to hide those documents, we would be going to jail.
I hear you, and I respect that view. My only problem with that is there's so much the over-criminalization of society. There's the law is extraordinarily complex as it relates to expectations for people in political office, campaign finance, the Hatch Act, what you're allowed to do in official capacity. There's so much there, and then there's so much in a non-political context. I've heard this argument, and people who work in criminal justice will say this, that if they really, really, really want to, we all violate a law every day inadvertently without knowing it. If they really want to get you on something, they always can. And so it's not. It's more so that the leeway shown to Donald Trump, I would probably should be shown to more people without political power and influence. Like, I don't want to lock up everybody for not dotting their I's and crossing their T's, right? I'm sure you don't either.
I don't, but I do want to lock up people who try to violently overturn an election, so that's another element of the whole thing. But anyway.
All right, well, that's our debate on that subject for today. Tell us what you think in the comments, and we'll be back with a lot more Rising right after this. CNN's conservative commentator Scott Jennings shocked his co-panelists by stating that under Elon Musk, X is more politically neutral than it was previously. When he was asked to cite his sources, Jennings replied, CNN. Let's watch.
I heard what you're saying about X. I saw a survey this week. It's now the most ideologically balanced user platform.
Scott,
of any platform.
stop. It's too early. I just sat down. I've only been here for 2 minutes.
You're going to be embarrassed when I tweet out after the show, but
you
it's
cannot
true.
say that.
So-
That's not the case.
So
Who's
what
the
I-
source?
What I find, we reported it on this network. And
It's
so-
not accurate, and you know it.
Okay, I'll let you make your statement.
Scott,
but my point is
can I
this.
reframe it a different way? Because the site changed radically, right? So whether you think the voices it is somehow more balanced now, that's fine. But no doubt Musk's influence is profound, and that you open it up and now you're there with his opinion, and he is now part of this administration. So does anyone else think that there should be this greater concern about billionaires purchasing media companies?
Okay. Would you be worried if Bill Gates controlled MSNBC?
No, because he's sane.
Because MS...
You can probably guess what I'm going to criticize here. Very wealthy people being in charge of media companies was never a problem before for any of these people. But now there's one who's very right-leaning and Trump-supporting, who has his own media platform, and it's very bad, but I don't think there was a lot of panic from the CNN or MSNBC crowd, who they're in organizations owned by wealthy people or beholden to wealthy advertisers or corporate interests, which, as I explained in my monologue, I don't particularly think is a bad or pernicious influence. It's just reality. But Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook, something that was, now he has certainly tilted it in, I would argue, a more neutral direction, and I'm a fan of the things Mark Zuckerberg has done recently in particular, but going back to the Obama years, it was hailed and celebrated for how important it was to the Obama campaign, going back to 2008. When social media, so this is my criticism, when social media, massive media, new media, when it was all being harnessed for liberal or progressive causes, it was all fine. But now that conservative people are actually succeeding on it, legacy media is suddenly, oh no, this is a disaster. Is that fair?
Well, it seems to be fair based on that. I was not watching CNN last night or wherever we drew that clip from, so I haven't seen it in its entirety. I don't think it is that controversial to say that Elon Musk has radically changed what was once Twitter and what is now X. And those changes do, I think, include the foregrounding of more broadly conservative voices than they did in the past. Now, the thing that I would push back on, and it goes back to your radar, actually, we didn't get the chance earlier in the earlier segment to discuss this idea that Elon Musk said, you are the media to the users of X, or I guess the users of social media more broadly. And I don't completely disagree with that, but I think my issue is that makes him a media proprietor in the way that, whether it's Jeff Bezos or Rupert Murdoch is the obvious example of a person who liberals did have and do have a lot of trouble with having the influence that he holds. And I would say this about Musk and X. He is running a massively important platform, for good or for bad, at the same time as he has massive business with the federal government, as you and I have discussed before, billions of dollars in contracts. And he is, at least arguably, making X more supportive of a particular candidate who won the recent election. I do think there are legitimate questions about someone, regardless of their ideology, using a media platform, even a social media platform, to promote political figures who are going to be helpful to their business interests.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you can probably make that same argument, though, about Jeff Bezos and what he did with the Washington Post. There's someone who is the owner, et cetera, of Amazon, who maybe could have expected regulation of Amazon during the first Trump administration of a more populist Trump bent than previous Republicans, adopted the whole democracy dies in darkness framing, went whole hog on anti-Trump stuff. You can argue that that was in his business interest. I've never cared. I think that's totally fine that he does that. He bought the newspaper. It's his now. He can do what he wants with it. Same goes for Elon. In terms of Elon making X more so I do agree with you that X is a media property. Elon is the owner of it, and you're right to wonder about the unique level of influence he has over Donald Trump and whether that's going to translate to. I'm more concerned with that in other fields, like favorable policies for electric vehicles or something else, than I am really about his management of the social media site, which is pretty. The regulations there are pretty not regulated because it's a speech-related platform, right? We have pretty ironclad protections under First Amendment, Section 230, et cetera. It has become more conservative, the site, certainly, since Elon taking over the content on it. But whether that's, what comes first, the chicken or the egg here, because there has been something of an exodus of liberal and progressive users.
Sure.
And so what remains are people who want to engage with more conservative content, and so the algorithm is feeding the new user base more conservative content. I think that is more to the story than Elon Musk constantly flipping I think he might have flipped a switch to promote his own content more. It's his site. He's like, I want everybody to see what I have to say.
Sure.
I don't know that he flipped a switch to say, show more content from Republicans or conservative stuff in general. I think that's the feedback loop of the user base changing and wanting more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to happen on Facebook, too, where with no desire from management to push conservative content whatsoever. But I used to argue with conservatives about this back when they were more likely to attack Facebook, actually, than anything else. Before hating Facebook became, I think, more of a Democratic thing because of Russia stuff. Prior to 2016, so many conservatives screaming about Facebook, and I say, well, look, guys, look at you can see it. What are the top 10 links performing on stories on Facebook today? It's something from the Daily Wire, the Daily Caller, the Blaze, Fox News, Breitbart, etc. This is the most important platform for delivering right-of-center news right now. And where you want to break it, it doesn't even make any sense. So that without Facebook trying to intentionally promote those sites or those messages, the user base hungered for it.
Sure.
So I expect a similar thing has happened on Twitter.
I do think there is validity to that argument on that the algorithm is going to serve up what the audience is looking for because they want to keep people engaged. I do wonder, though, in terms of, yes, Elon owns it, and if someone owns something, they can do what they wish with it. But I do think in terms of just overall the idea of it being a forum for debate. So they're not going to tell us exactly what the specifics of their algorithmic changes are, but just on a very basic level, you had the change in the verification system. Now, you could debate one way or another the old verification system and whether it elevated people sort of unjustly. But now you have a pay-for verification system. The people who are most inclined to give that money are people who like Elon Musk, and the people who like Elon Musk are broadly more likely to share his politics. So therefore you have a sort of artificial elevation, to my mind, of that kind of view.
There's also I think the site giving, verification to notable people to protect against fraud, which you used to do and now you have to pay for it. Yeah, that's a change I'm not sure that I did love. However, I do love the monetization of your own tweet. People are now getting paid for their contributions to the site. I turned on monetization to see what it'd be like. Not that I need more money or I'm starving out there at all.
More money for Mr.
It's nice to you're creating on the platform, and to get a share of that back is and there's people making who started out with less notoriety than me and have really turned it into a successful career and get paid a lot more money than I do from doing it, and I think that's cool and healthy and was a good idea of Elon's.
We're probably running out of time, I think, but do you not think there's an incentive to provide inflammatory comment under that system? Well,
again, that goes to my earlier commentary during my radar that yes, but that's the same incentive that just exists on all media formats, to have something sensational and viral, and we feel that, unless you're the most boring, like local news radio or something, you feel no desire or need to shock. It titillates your audience, you're fine, but everywhere else, we got to keep you people entertained. Are you not entertained? Oh, I saw the second Gladiator movie last night.
Oh, did you? And? Were you entertained?
No, it was terrible. I hated it. It was really bad. Maybe I'll share more of those thoughts coming up next. Stay tuned. More Rising on the way.
President-elect Donald Trump won the election in large part because of his ability to appeal to working-class, non-college educated, blue-collar workers across the country. Trump built his 2020 campaign and fortified his 2024 re-election effort around a coalition of these folks. But many of his advisors are among the wealthy elite. tech giant, Elon Musk, boasts an estimated $321 billion net worth. Linda McMahon, who's been tapped to head up the education department, is said to be worth $2.9 billion. And Trump's pick to lead the Commerce Department, Howard Lutnick, sits at an estimated $1.5 billion. And that leaves out Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He's reported to be worth about $1 billion. Just a few of the president-elect's ultra-rich picks.
Nevertheless, conservatives are very excited about these picks. Here to talk about Trump's developing cabinet is Republican strategist Melik Abdul. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So what is your theory as a GOP strategist of these picks? Many people would say, try to read the ideologies behind them, particularly on the foreign policy side. Is this the non-interventionist aspect of the base, if you're thinking of someone like Tulsi Gabbard, but then Marco Rubio has a very different policy. And then, yes, there's a number of extremely wealthy people. Does that actually harm his appeal to working class, the new voters he has brought in? I would argue it does not at all, but you might feel differently.
No, on your last point, no, I don't think it does at all. Donald Trump is a unique politician. This is one of those once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime politicians, in the sense that you won't have another one of him. Donald Trump he's led the life of a billionaire, a very wealthy person. And the fact that he was able to connect as the populace, if you will, that is something that is specific to Donald Trump. And you haven't seen anyone be able to replicate that, despite they may have tried. I think we probably started seeing in the Barack Obama administration, at least that's when I started paying attention, but definitely by the 2016 Donald Trump administration, there were a number of cabinet appointees who did not take salaries. Betsy DeVos, she was one of those. Linda McMahon was another one of those, I believe, as Treasury Secretary. But they were able to do it because they had made so much money that they didn't have to take a salary. Obviously, Donald Trump returned his salary as well. But I don't think most people are surprised to know that the powerful and elite hang around the powerful and elite. And so I think it signals something, at least as far as the Donald Trump, the cabinet picks from what I'm looking at, because he's had a variety of perspectives, some of whom that I probably would not have initially supported. But the fact that he's had so many different points of views, at the end of the day, this is Donald Trump's administration. And I think that he chose people. I was listening to someone and they pointed out that the people that he chose for these cabinet picks are very good communicators. And I didn't really consider that. He probably wants them going out advocating for his policies. But at the end of the day, this is Donald Trump's administration. So it doesn't matter. As I've said before, RFK may have a position on the vaccine. That's fine. We know that Operation Warp Speed was one of the things that Donald Trump had helped us usher through during the COVID pandemic. So Donald Trump is not anti-vaccine. A number of other positions that cabinet people, think about it. Donald Trump's own vice president, his current vice president, likened Donald Trump to Hitler. So the idea that there are going to be people who they're going to do what they want to do, no, this is Donald Trump's ship. And I think that he's gotten a number of very good people. We'll see what happens. I don't think we'll have another Matt Gaetz. I'll just say flat out, I was against Matt Gaetz from day one. I'm happy that Matt Gaetz is no longer in Congress. And I think that Republicans overall can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that he will not be the Attorney General.
I think there are several different points there, Melik, and I take the point that there are lots of people who are very rich who may not take salaries for their government work. But where we began was talking about President-elect Trump's appeal to working class voters. And I think there are legitimate questions there in the sense that he does, I think, identify ways in which that social strata has been mistreated or left behind by the political system in some ways. But then the bigger question is, does he or his administration have any real interest in finding actual solutions for them? So when you look at people like Linda McMahon or Howard Lutnick or Elon Musk, for that matter, is there really any evidence that they care about working people?
Well, keep in mind, Linda McMahon, she was the former SBA administrator, so she's been in the Trump administration before. She's been Senate confirmed, so there's a pretty good record for her when it comes to SBA. And there are a lot of things that the SBA did, even when it came to its Minority Development Business Agency. That is one of the things that was under the purview the Small Business Administration, even though I think it has some level of independence there. But there are a number of things that Trump, not just his cabinet picks particularly, but that he did as president of the United States. And I think what gets lost a lot of times is that Donald Trump was president of the United States before. So there are a number of things that he did to advance a number of communities. I've seen now that we've had many conversations about how the rich have only gotten richer under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That will continue under Donald Trump. The rich will get even richer under Donald Trump. And I think that it depends on the type of, how people view that is dependent upon the economic anxiety that they're feeling. And I think even though that there are some elements where it seems as if the economy may be doing better, I know as someone who literally just paid $3.89 for a dozen of eggs at the store, that's what people look at their pocketbook. So much like we were in 2020, it wasn't that Donald Trump, the federal government, was negligent or the federal government much erred when it came to responding to COVID. It was Donald Trump's personal response, people viewing his leadership during the time of a global pandemic, and people judged him on that. It didn't matter that they were being able to get tests and all of these other type of things. It's what they felt. And what they felt at the time is that Donald Trump was not being a strong leader. They did not have confidence in him as the president of the United States. And I think that's a similar thing that we saw with Joe Biden now being in office. Donald Trump may or may not, who knows, I may be paying $4.19 by the end of, by the time we get to 2028. I'm not sure, but it's how people feel. If people feel as if they're doing better, it doesn't matter if, on the numbers they are, then that's typically how they vote. And I said many times, how people feel at the end of the day is how they vote. But Donald Trump remains a unique figure. I don't think that we'll have another politician being able to straddle the fence of billionairehood with just your regular populist everyday person, because Donald Trump won't go to the Iowa caucus and eat corn dogs. He's not going to do it.
Melik Abdul, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Some new developments in the transgender bathroom saga unfolding on Capitol Hill. Congresswoman Nancy Mace is going hard against allowing, according to her, biological males in female-only spaces. Mace and other Republicans are pushing to block transgender individuals from using the restroom that they say aligns with their gender identity on, quote, federal property. Digging deeper into that bill, it would also apply to buildings owned by the federal or D.C. governments and may include the district's public libraries, recreation centers, and potentially D.C. public schools.
This comes after the election victory of Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride. McBride will be the first openly transgender woman to serve in the House. She has said this push from lawmakers is a, quote, attempt to misdirect from larger issues.
Does raise many questions. Here to give her take on things is Executive Director of Rebellion PAC, Brianna Wu. Brianna, welcome back to Rising. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I wish it was on a happier subject, but here we go.
Yes, indeed. I know we have to... Who enjoys talking about using the bathroom? It's such a silly thing for this to have become a major flashpoint, and I suspect there's going to be a decent amount of agreement on this particular subject from the three of us. From my point, while I absolutely understand about the need for nuance, when you're talking about, and I believe you do as well, when you're talking about, facilities like locker rooms are used by sports teams, when you have people, having to undress in front of other people. I mean, that's something I want to extend more privacy to people in those settings, regardless of gender, frankly. But I can see where that calls for different accommodations. When it comes to bathrooms, I mean, my takeaway from looking at, over Sarah McBride, who I didn't know until this entire controversy started, is that if this person was forced to use the male restroom, I think that would create almost even a greater discomfort in that circumstance, because she is very female presenting and passing, and that this is kind of not a great idea. That's my, gut reaction. What's yours?
Well, I tend to agree with that, Robby. And, Look, I love men. I've been married to a man for 16 years and counting. But the truth is, some guys get a little, frankly, weird when, they find out we're trans. And I think if you're forcing women like Sarah and I into the men's room, it's going to be a very dangerous situation for us. I do just want to give some charity to the other side. And the kernel of truth, like Nancy Mace would not have power if there were not truth to what she is saying. And the reality is the trans movement has gone off the rails. They have pushed for an all-new system called self-ID. And what this means is when I transitioned 20 years ago, I had to go to a therapist for 3 months. I had to get on HRT. I had to have a doctor sign a letter to basically say, look, this person has clinical medical gender dysphoria. She is medically committing to transitioning. Today, that system has been completely removed by activists. And the reality is, Robby, you could go fill out a form right now in California, declare you're a female, and waltz into a locker room and wave your penis around if you wanted to. This is very bad policy, and it is the transgender fringe that has pushed it to the point that Nancy Mace has to have an answer for this. So if we are serious about protecting transgender people, we need to retreat to the medical protocols that guaranteed our rights for almost 40 years.
I know there's a lot of politics in this issue, Brianna, but I do think that personal experiences are really important and often get sort of erased or treated badly in terms of the political debates around them. In terms of your transition, how traumatic did you find that? How was it a relief to finally transition? Tell us just a little bit more, if you are willing to do so, about that experience.
Of course. I knew something was really, really deeply wrong with me when I was 3 years old. And every time I tried to act in a way that felt natural to me, I got punished. There were not exactly gender affirming youth clinics in Mississippi in the 80s and 90s. And it took a very, very heavy toll. By 19, I was a full-on drug addict, just trying to get these thoughts about how I desperately wanted to be a woman out of my head. What was really amazing is the instant I got on HRT and I started transitioning, I went from a drug-addicted shut-in to literally a national figure within 5 years. My career took off. I've literally hired over 200 people in my career. And I think most people would say I'm a political leader today. America is a choice. They can give people like me a path to get health care and to contribute to society, or you can deny us legitimacy in the public square and basically spend a lot more money and have a lot of lost talent on the table. So what I'm asking my fellow Americans is, I understand trans civil rights has gone off course. I'm putting a lot of political capital on the line trying to correct that. And you can see Democrats like Seth Moulton trying to step up and guide us back to reality on this. So I think if the American people will be patient for just a year, I think you're going to see some real changes in the way these things are legislated. And I think they'll see public policy that balances the needs of their daughters with the needs of kids who were exactly like I was.
Right. There, if you look at the two extreme sides, that there's as you described, an activist fringe on this issue who wants it to be so easy that I think it worries a lot of families to begin invasive medical procedures without properly vetting, as the process you described. That's on one fringe, and then on the other, there are a large number of people in this country who are socially conservative and say it's men and women and there's nothing you can do to go from one group to the other. I'm not in that category of people. I'm in the large middle group of people who say, no, there are certainly cases like your case where this kind of intervention was warranted and helped and was a good and healthy choice that should be available with proper counseling and making sure it's a medical diagnosis, and then that's fine. But we don't want to. We want to make sure, fully vet and understand that this is the right choice for this family or this individual in consultation with experts, not something forced on them the first time they express discomfort in their bodies. Something the vast majority of teenagers, particularly teenage girls, but young gay kids, etc., feel, and that this would not be the right choice for them, and it needs to be thoroughly discussed.
I fully agree with that, Robby. And I think you would be serving young women out there if we just completely took minors who are natal females off the board. The reality is testosterone will work for them just as well at 25 and 35 at 15. There's no reason to rush this. And for whatever reason, their detransition rates are through the roof. This scares me as someone who is trans and who has gone through this process. The number of these girls that are regretting it and are having permanent damage to their body, it needs to be taken off the board. And I know that's going to upset a lot of people. The other truth of this, Robby, is the standards I transitioned with 20 years ago have been obliterated by activists. Go read the DSM-5 criteria for gender dysphoria. It has been lowered to 6 categories, and you only have to have 2 of them, even in minors, to get a valid transition diagnosis. I hit all 6 of those very easily. And the thought of a minor out there just experiencing 2, it is not surprising to me that gay kids are getting caught up in this and are being funneled down this transition pathway. So the truth, Robby, is, WPATH and these medical organizations, they've been hijacked by the lunatic fringe of progressive activism. They are dismantling the medical safeguards. And what it is doing is it's not just capturing kids in this, it is capturing adults that are not going to be served by medical transition. So if you care about trans people being happy and having successful lives, we've got to get this fringe out of the system today. We need healthcare providers to be healthcare providers again and not political activists.
Brianna Wu, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We'll have you back soon.
Of course.
Walmart is ending its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Walmart confirmed on Monday it would no longer consider race and gender to boost diversity when granting supplier contracts. The retail giant will also curb racial equity training for staff and review its support for Pride events. The changes were made public after an anti-DEI activist named Robby Starbuck threatened to expose Walmart. Starbuck wrote on X, "Massive news, Walmart is ending their woke policies. I can now exclusively tell you what's changing and how it happened. Last week I told execs at Walmart that I was doing a story on wokeness there. Instead, we had productive conversations to find solutions." Starbuck added, "Below are the changes Walmart committed to. I have to give their executives major credit because this will send shockwaves throughout corporate America. This is the biggest win yet for our movement to end wokeness in corporate America." That's the other anti-woke Robby out there.
Walmart joined an array of companies, including Ford, John Deere, Harley-Davidson, Boeing Company, to name a few, to pull their DEI programs. Walmart released a statement saying, "We've been on a journey, and no, we aren't perfect, but every decision comes from a place of wanting to foster a sense of belonging, to open doors to opportunities for all our associates, customers, and suppliers, and to be a Walmart for everyone."
This move by Walmart did attract some social media reactions. Christopher Rufo of City Journal writing on X, "Walmart is backing down from DEI and shuttering its Center for Racial Equity. This is another huge win." Tiffany Fong wrote on X, "Walmart is cutting back its DEI programs and preventing sellers from listing some LGBTQ-themed items on its website. Can't wait for this woke, SHIT, to be over." And Elon Musk also chimed in, as he often does, "The tide has turned." Joining us now to discuss is GOP strategist Melik Abdul. Thank you for joining us, Melik.
Thanks for having me.
So I have long hypothesized that the kind of height of wokeness or cancel culture, or it's that, whatever metaphor you want to use for it, maybe an infection, in the corporate world, the height of it was like 2019 to 2022. And it is now retreating from those institutions as corporations discover that, A, you can't appease ultimately like your easily offended woke employees, and nothing will ever be good enough for them. B, this doesn't make money because consumers hate it. And C, a lot of these initiatives actually have a very, for instance, the anti-bias kind of training is actually very unscientific and does not have a good track record of improving employee relations. And so they're shedding it, as it seems to be the case. What do you think?
So I think we should understand that when it comes to woke, woke is more so now an umbrella. It's an umbrella term, and a lot of things fall under it. There are things that companies, organizations, and governments have done for years around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but some of those things have been maybe around recruitment efforts. So you may have a place like a Lockheed Martin who understand a certain community, whether that's an indigenous community or in places in urban centers where they specifically target those individuals, and a majority of them may be minority. Those are those efforts. But then from the conservative perspective, and this is where the problem has really lied, is that they see anything nowadays as anything that is DEI, that means that you are automatically unqualified. And that has added another layer to the discussion. Over the years, we have seen, and you mentioned it, we've seen over the years this anti-racism effort, this effort to unlearn racism. I think that is one of the things for advocates of those in the DEI industry. This is one of the things where they've gone too far. So where you're advocating for things like, certain literature in schools and books, and parents were protesting, and then you had the Department of Justice, kind of trying to get involved, issuing statements about these type of threats. That changes the entire dynamic. So I think when it comes to DEI, we've seen even over the past 4 years, from 2020, where you had organizations hiring, Black executives, and this push for say their names. You're wearing Breonna Taylor's name on your back. All of these things happen, and within the span of 4 years. To your point, when it comes to those type of anti-racism efforts, we've seen that there is no empirical evidence to show that actually does anything for the actual company, and it seems as if we're here now.
So I just want to get back to the point that you began with, Melik, which is the elements of DEI or wokeness, which is not a term I love, but in any event, the things that you do think are legitimate within that approach. So I note that in Walmart's case, there's a suggestion, well, more than a suggestion, a statement that it will no longer consider race and gender to boost diversities in supplier contracts. Now, that seems to me a very separate issue from unlearning racism and so forth, because, without relitigating the entire history of this country, there has obviously been gross and egregious discrimination against Black people and other people of color, and it doesn't seem unreasonable to me to suggest that there should be some effort made when apportioning supplier contracts and so forth to make a corporate effort to overcome or to the extent possible, transcend that history.
So this is when you get into the weeds. You try to unpack this argument. Walmart making this effort to, eliminate their DEI program. What does that actually mean in practice? Well, we know as a matter of law that in order for companies to even get certain contracts and grants, they have to have some sort of quote unquote minority set aside. So this is something that is enshrined into law. And so in order for these things to change, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, to say that you won't consider race when you're considering contracts, because again, the federal government requires you to. I mean, there's a whole agency developed to this type of thing. So I don't know what this stuff actually means in practice. We've seen in cases where, and I think that the legitimate things, like the legitimate things around the anti-racist training, I think those are legitimate things. So back in, this effort in 2021, where I think the Lockheed Martin executive had to testify before Congress, and they were mandating that their employees, it was called white males awareness training. I think that's what it was called. Those type of things I think are legitimate, but I don't know how you get around not doing or making an effort. And Republicans, conservatives need to understand, even though it wasn't under the umbrella of DEI, do you know what Justice Brett Kavanaugh did when he first got in, his first term? He had an all-female clerks. He had all-female clerks. Now that wasn't a DEI effort in the general sense of DEI, but that is what DEI looks like. And in the matter of the Supreme Court, why does it matter? Because we know the overwhelming majority of judicial clerkships go to men. The overwhelming majority of them go to white men. So how do you, account for that? And I think that that's something that Republicans, conservatives surely need to understand. But for them, when Donald Trump said that he would specifically choose a woman, he didn't say a black woman, an Asian woman, or white woman, but when he specifically said that he would choose a woman to replace the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that's exactly what he did. Conservatives don't see that as DEI because they see Amy Coney Barrett as eminently qualified.
Well, right. I mean, I think it's the different. I mean, most conservatives would say, regardless of their, what I guess the review, what they actually do, conservatives would say that you should just pick the most qualified person, independent of other of their racial or gender-based attributes. There's a difference between there's a couple differences here. There's a difference, between doing outreach to people who've been historically overlooked, which I think is absolutely not only fine, but good and necessary. And then there's, specifically trying to fill a quota or have a certain number of people who check off boxes, which is, I think, what conservatives tend to be particularly against. I would assume Brett Kavanaugh didn't pick all women on purpose, or maybe he picked all women because of the accusations against him, or try to shed the idea that he has some kind of bad history of relationships with women, but ultimately that they were the most qualified. And there's even a difference between saying, I'm going to pick the most qualified person, but for instance, to be my vice president, but there are a number of qualified or equally qualified people, so it's important to me to have a woman, which is what Bernie Sanders kind of did versus what Joe Biden did, where he said, no, it's going to be a black woman regardless. We're not even, no said and done, because I really want to satisfy whoever was clamoring for it to be a particularly diverse pick.
So I think it's because we look at race and gender very differently. For me, those are parallels. Donald Trump saying that he would he would exclude men, that he would only choose a woman as his nominee for the Supreme Court. For me, it is the exact same thing as Joe Biden saying that he would limit his picks for vice president to a black woman. They are two different groups. Now, the thing is that women, including black women, they're lumped into the women group. That's not the other way around. I think that we look at race and gender very differently here. And so when I've even asked conservatives, I've said, okay, so when Donald Trump said that he would choose a woman, their immediate thing is, but she's qualified. Well, again, this is DEI on the conservative side, unfortunately. And many of those that you mentioned, Robby, who were starting pushing these efforts, it has literally become synonymous. DEI has become synonymous with not just being black and unqualified, but it's giving black people an advantage. Because even though I thought that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, I thought that she was eminently qualified to be on the Supreme Court. I understood from the conservatives' perspective, but when Joe Biden said that he would only choose a black woman, for them, then it was immediately she was unqualified, ignoring the experience that she had. Conservatives did the same thing when it came to calling Dr. Gay at Harvard, even though that she had been in a lot of administrative positions at several universities before then. It is how we view DEI, and I think that the activists on the DEI side, on the DEI side, I think that they've done a disservice to the overall movement, because now we can't even have these type of conversations. The fact that companies are saying, well, we're no longer going to entertain race when it comes to our contracts. I mean, I don't think that is a good outcome, and it's unfortunate that we got here. But my point is that both sides have had really integral roles to play in how we got here.
Melik Abdul, we're going to keep you around to discuss the Trump cabinet picks. That's coming up next on Rising. Stay tuned. Some news for the weight loss industry. President Joe Biden has greenlit millions of Americans with obesity to be eligible to be covered under Medicare or Medicaid coverage for drugs like Ozempic and etc. The Department of Health and Human Services has put forth this costly proposal Tuesday morning. It could cost taxpayers as much as $35 billion over the next decade. Celebrity fitness trainer Jillian Michaels has been outspoken about her disdain for Ozempic and for other weight loss drugs. Here's her take on this, what some people describe Ozempic as a miracle drug. Let's watch.
Number one, they're extremely expensive. Number two, you can never get off of them or you gain all the weight back and then some. Number three, there are significant side effects And I encourage you to watch that debate and learn for yourself so that you can make the decision with your eyes wide open. And number 4, and arguably the most important point for today, is that the reason that people are having an impossible time with regard to not overeating is because the ultra-processed foods you and I were just talking about are specifically, strategically designed to undermine our satiety and be addictive. And this is just one more thing that Bobby Kennedy will hopefully be rectifying when he gets to be the head of HHS.
RFK Jr. has spoken out against the wonder drug too. He's calling for tackling obesity and chronic illness through healthier eating instead. Michaels is on board with that. Let's listen.
You on board with that?
That's not necessarily what he's saying, but he is absolutely trying to reduce the amount of chemicals in those highly processed foods. In other words, he wants the toxic pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, chemical fertilizers out of the food. And to give you some framework on this, there's a historical connection to those chemicals and Agent Orange. So it's kind of a big deal, and people just don't understand it. We have a loophole in the FDA that allows 10,000 chemicals into our food.
Now, Kennedy, of course, is the nominee from President-elect Trump to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. He has taken the pricey medication that costs upwards of $1,000 a month head on. But his war on obesity in the age of Ozempic could shake up the weight loss industry boom. Food startups like Foodbox RX, a healthy foods delivery service, reported a boost in venture capital interest since RFK Jr.'s nomination, according to Bloomberg News.
Regardless, not being confirmed to spearhead HHS yet, RFK Jr. is getting some reactions on X. Richard Hanania posted, quote, Biden going to have Medicare and Medicaid cover Ozempic, which needs to be done through HHS. Good move to do this before RFK and his friends take over. Founder of Conservative Ladies of America, Julie Barrett, posted, now Biden wants taxpayers to fund Ozempic and other weight loss drugs for people on Medicare. I spend most of my adult life in the health and fitness industry, and everyone is always looking for the quick fix. Newsflash, there are no shortcuts. So I wanted to discuss Ozempic on the program with you here, Niall, because I think this is a very interesting debate, actually.
It is.
I don't quite know where I come down on it. On one hand, I think Ozempic holds a lot of promise, not just for curing obesity, but for helping people deal with addictions in general. Drug addiction, alcohol addiction, this is something that is affecting a larger and larger number of Americans, and it shows real progress there, and it's so difficult to get people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol to quit using. The kind of group therapy and rehabilitation and all that has a very slight track record for actually. It works for some people. It does not work. And it's very expensive and does not work for a large number of people. So some other cure, miracle or no, just having something else on the table is great. And so I don't share the automatic suspicion that Jillian Michaels and RFK Jr. have, because when you say things like, well, you have to keep taking it and then else you gain the weight back, I mean, that's true of any weight loss program. You have to eat healthy forever. You have to eat less forever.
If you cut out carbs and then you start eating them again, the weight that you lost comes back, right?
Yeah, and while I absolutely want to do what we can to reorganize society around healthier eating and outdoor activity, I think more outdoor activity for young people is very essential. How can we incentivize that? How can we make it more common again for kids to bike to school and walk to school and play outside, that kind of thing? All for that. Vast societal transformation for our very obese society to have these health interventions is just really difficult, really expensive, is honestly impractical, whereas maybe something like Ozempic is not. All that said, the cost could be tremendous, and everything that's approved is going to be covered by Medicare, Medicaid. I do understand it's going to be a significant cost, and I don't know if that should actually be part of something the public ought to pay for. I can see the argument for no. Where do you come down on this?
So we'll get to the bigger debate in a second on some of those completely valid points that you raised. On the cost issue, I do think it's really important to just state the obvious, which is obesity costs the country a vast sum of money. According to the CDC, $173 billion a year is their estimate of that. Against that, the Medicare and Medicaid proposal is projected to cost $35 billion over a decade. Now, obviously, not every single obese person is eligible or on Medicare or Medicaid, but there would be very significant cost savings to us as a nation, as a society, if we could get a handle on the obesity epidemic, really. Now, that is a problem. That is a problem that needs to be addressed. The bigger question, I mean, I think, oddly enough, we both have ambivalences about this, because I do get the idea that if people can take Ozempic or equivalent drugs and lose weight, that may be an easier way forward than changing one's diet or habits. I don't think we need to sort of, in some ascetic, like monk-like way, insist that people lose weight through, changing their lifestyle. If they can do it with a drug, theoretically, okay. I guess, I'm critical of RFK in lots of ways. One of the things that I'm less critical of him about is his skepticism about the pharmaceutical industry writ large. The idea of, are you pushing drugs for profit that the same outcome could be produced some other way? Now, obviously, advocates of Ozempic would say, no, it can't. That's the question.
Right, and in the, this is a different kind of drug, and so far the evaluations looked pretty good. Like I saw something, again, a Ozempic critical person being like, there was a study that, for 1 in 5 obese people, it's not going to work. I'm like, what does that mean for 4 in 5? It does.
Right,
Again, that would be a tremendous track record.
Right.
The weight loss programs you sign up for, the exercise regimes, people say, I'm going to get myself in much better shape, I'm going to lose a ton of weight for a variety of reasons. Those things fail. It's in the vast majority of cases. Even think of like the show that Jillian Michaels came from, Biggest Loser.
Biggest Loser, right?
People, you read stories, people gain that weight back like that. It is really hard to change human behavior. And I'm someone who is skeptical, very skeptical, about using the heavy hand of government, in particular, to change human behavior. But on the not as confident about Ozempic side, I will say that the kind of mass prescribing of mood-changing or antidepressants, those kinds of things, or for dealing with hyperactive kids that they all got to be on Ritalin or whatever, or Adderall, or all that stuff. I do have a lot of worries about the impact that's had, or just medicalizing normal, disruptive or
young child behavior,
asocial behavior, and saying that the right solution for this is a drug rather than some other kind of working through it. I have a lot of skepticism of that. So if Ozempic is in that category, I get why people would be like, there's another thing to give to everyone. But the real need to lose weight and to fix severe obesity among Americans is an issue. This came out so clearly during COVID, where the worst, most likely to be fatal outcomes were for older people and severely obese people of any age.
Sure, and I mean, there are enormous difficulties that are very much related to obesity, whether it's heart disease, stroke, certain forms of cancer, and all of that. I do take your point very much about Ritalin and ADHD and all of that, not to say that no one suffers from those as genuine ailments. Obviously, people do. But I do think there can be an over-prescription and to some extent over-diagnosis of behavior that is not actually evidence of some flaw. I guess the distinction would be in the case of obesity, and I don't mean this in some comic, but I mean, you can see, like, you're not misdiagnosing a person if they're 300 pounds and 5'6", like they're obviously obese. So, that's the issue.
Yeah, this is going to continue to be a fascinating subject for some time. Maybe we'll try to get some dissenting or disagreeing experts to weigh in. I'm very interested to see what HHS does with Ozempic, where the various ideological sides end up coming down on this, because conservatives would say there's been a lot of demonization of being fit and healthy coming from fat acceptance left type people, but of course, because left-leaning people are disproportionately now wealthy and better educated, that tracks with better health choices, so it's all over the place. It's going to be interesting.
It is an interesting debate for sure.
All right. That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We will be back tomorrow with our final edition of our show before the Thanksgiving holiday. See you then.